The quiet farm was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where a retired sniper could finally bury her past. But when menacing neighbors dared to threaten her daughter, she was forced to unearth a very different kind of harvest. The quiet was the reason I bought the place. Not silence. You never get true silence in the country. There's always the wind whispering through the corn, the lowing of my 2 dairy cows in the barn, the frantic chirping of sparrows in the eaves. But it was a peaceful quiet. A world away from the other kind of quiet I once knew, the tense, breathless quiet of a mountain pass, waiting for a target to step into my crosshairs. Here, the only thing I was aiming for was a peaceful life for me and my 7-year-old daughter, Maya. We had 200 acres of rolling Virginia hills, a sturdy farmhouse I'd been fixing up myself, and a sense of freedom I'd spent 10 years in the service fighting for. The first time I saw the truck, I didn't think much of it. A beat-up, mud-splattered Ford, older than I was, with a Confederate flag decal peeling on the back window. It slowed as it passed my long gravel driveway, the 2 men inside craning their necks to get a better look at me and Maya planting our vegetable garden. I just gave a tight, polite nod, the kind you give to strangers in a new town, and went back to showing Maya how to nestle a tomato seedling into the earth. But they didn't drive on. They stopped just past the edge of my property and watched. I could feel their eyes on my back, a prickly, unpleasant sensation I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't curiosity, it was appraisal. After a long minute, the truck's engine coughed to life, and it rumbled away down the county road. I told myself it was nothing, just some local good old boys, probably wondering who bought the old Miller farm. A week later, I found the first message. It was spray-painted in crude, red letters on the white fence I had just finished painting. A single, ugly word. The kind of word designed to make my skin crawl, to make me feel like an intruder on my own land. I felt a flash of heat, a white-hot anger that rose in my chest, but I pushed it down. Panic is a luxury. Emotion is a liability. I learned that lesson in places where a single mistake could get your whole team killed. I took a photo with my phone, my hand steady, documenting the angle, the time of day. Then I got the turpentine and a scraper and spent the next hour erasing it, my jaw set so tight it ached. I made sure it was gone before Maya woke up. She didn't need to see that. She didn't need to know that kind of hate existed. The truck came back that night. I was reading Maya a bedtime story when I heard the low rumble of its engine, much closer this time. It idled at the end of my driveway, its headlights cutting across our living room windows. Then the music started loud, aggressive country rock, the lyrics filled with a kind of defiant pride that always seemed to go hand in hand with intolerance. I walked to the window, staying in the shadows, and peered out. The same Ford. 4 men now, silhouettes in the cab, passing a bottle between them. They weren't just passing by. They were making a statement. They were marking their territory, and they had decided I was trespassing. I made sure Maya was asleep, her little chest rising and falling rhythmically. Then I called the sheriff's department. The dispatcher sounded bored. Deputy Miller showed up 45 minutes later, long after the truck had peeled out, leaving tire marks on the asphalt and a cloud of exhaust in the air. He was a portly man, with a mustache that seemed to droop with disinterest. I explained the situation calmly and clearly, the truck, the men, the vandalism from the week before. I showed him the photo on my phone. He squinted at it. "Well, ma'am," he said, with a slow drawl that grated on my nerves. "Looks like you got some kids with a can of spray paint." Happens all the time. He didn't seem to care about the word itself. When I mentioned the truck and the late-night visit, he shifted his weight. "Are you sure you didn't do something to provoke 'em? You're new around here. Folks can be particular." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I wasn't just new. I was a black woman, alone, on a farm that had been owned by a white family for generations. The deputy left with a promise to keep an eye out, which I knew was code for do absolutely nothing. I was on my own. I'd always been better on my own anyway. For the next 2 weeks, a tense, unnatural quiet descended. It was the other kind of quiet again. The waiting kind. I didn't see the truck, but I felt them. I found footprints near the barn, too large to be mine. One of my fence lines was cut. Small things, designed to unnerve me, to let me know they were always watching. During the day, I was mommy. We baked cookies, we tended the chickens, we fixed the fence. But at night, when Maya was asleep, I became someone else. I walked the perimeter of my property, moving through the darkness with the silence born of years of practice. I mapped out sightlines from the tree line, identified choke points along the driveway, and noted every shadow that offered concealment. My senses, dulled by years of civilian life, sharpened to a razor's edge. Every creak of the old farmhouse, every rustle in the corn, was a potential contact. I was cataloguing, planning, preparing. The breaking point came on a cool Tuesday morning. I stepped out onto the front porch with a cup of coffee, the steam fogging in the crisp air. At first I didn't understand what I was seeing. There was a bloody, mangled heap of feathers and fur right on my welcome mat. It was Clementine, Maya's favorite of our laying hens, the one she'd named and would feed by hand. My stomach turned, but the cold, clear focus snapped into place. They had come onto my porch. They had touched my home. And pinned to the poor creature's body with a rusty nail was a folded piece of paper. My hand didn't shake as I pulled the nail free and unfolded the note. The words were scrawled in the same red as the spray paint. It wasn't a slur this time. It was a promise. "Get out. You and the little mutt are next." I stood there for a long time, the note trembling slightly in my hand. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the fields. It was a beautiful morning. They had brought the war to my home. They had threatened my child, and they were about to learn a very hard lesson about who they were dealing with. I went back inside, locked the door, and walked straight to the loose floorboard in my bedroom closet. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, was the life I had tried to leave behind. I unwrapped it carefully. The cold, familiar weight of the Macmillan TAC 338 sniper rifle settled into my hands like an old friend. They thought they were the predators, circling a helpless little sheep. They had no idea they had just walked into a kill box. First I dealt with Clementine. Before the sun was fully over the horizon, before the smell of coffee could reach Maya's room, I carried the small, broken body to the edge of the cornfield. I dug a deep hole with a spade, my movements efficient and methodical, each shovelful of earth a precise, measured act of control. I laid her in the ground, and as I filled the hole, I made a promise. Not to the chicken, but to the part of me that loved the peace I had found here. I promised that this violation would be the last. I burned the note in the kitchen sink, watching the hateful words turn to black, curling ash. When Maya came downstairs, rubbing the sleep from her eyes and asking where her favorite hen was, I told her a fox must have gotten into the coop. The lie tasted like bile in my throat, but the look of simple sadness on her face was better than the terror she would have felt if she knew the truth. That was a trade I would make every single time. With Maya off at school, the farm became my new area of operations. I didn't touch the Macmillan again. A rifle like that is a solution, and I wasn't at the solution phase yet. I was in the intelligence-gathering phase. You don't engage a target until you know everything about them, their numbers, their routines, their weaknesses. These men thought they were ghosts, slipping in and out under the cover of darkness. They didn't know they were dealing with a professional ghost hunter. I spent the day setting up my own security system, not cameras and alarms. Those are for civilians. They're a deterrent, and these men were clearly not deterred. I needed an early warning system. I rigged tripwires made of fishing line to tiny bells in the woods surrounding the house. I found natural funnels and choke points on my property, and subtly rearranged fallen logs and brush to make them the only logical path of approach. At night, anyone trying to sneak onto my land would make noise, and I would know exactly where they were coming from. My main objective was identifying the enemy. The truck was the key. I spent the next 2 days in a self-made observation post, a ghillie blanket draped over me in a thicket of trees that gave me a perfect concealed view of the county road about half a mile out. I had a spotting scope, a notepad, and a thermos of black coffee. The patience required for this kind of work is something you can't learn. It has to be forged into you by days of lying motionless in blistering heat or freezing mud. For 2 days I watched tractors, minivans, and pickup trucks roll by. On the third day, I got lucky. Just after dusk, I heard it before I saw it, the distinct, throaty rumble of that old Ford engine. It came into view, moving slow, and my hands were rock steady as I focused the scope. 4 men inside, just as before. They didn't stop this time, but they slowed down as they passed my driveway, their headlights sweeping across my mailbox. And for a glorious 3 seconds, the setting sun glinted perfectly off the rear license plate. I scribbled it down, my heart hammering a calm, steady beat. Got you. Back in the house, I used a burner laptop and a VPN to access a few databases that technically I shouldn't have access to anymore. Old habits and old backdoors die hard. The plate was registered to a man named Jedediah Stone. Address, 1415 Blackwood Creek Road. A quick search on a satellite map showed me the property was less than 10 miles from mine, a secluded, sprawling plot of land at the end of a dirt road surrounded by dense forest. It looked less like a farm and more like a compound. That night I prepared for a reconnaissance mission. I dressed in dark fatigues, soft-soled boots, and painted my face with camo grease paint. I left a note for the babysitter saying I was dealing with a sick cow in the far pasture, and my phone might not have service. Another lie. They were piling up. Moving through the woods at night is like walking on water for me. I know how to use the shadows, how to step without snapping a twig, how to become just another part of the darkness. I came in from the north, the hard way, through 2 miles of thick, unforgiving forest, leaving my car on an old logging trail. The air at the compound was thick with the smell of cheap beer and wood smoke. A bonfire raged in the center of a clearing, illuminating the main house and several outbuildings. The Ford was there, along with 3 other trucks. There were more than 4 of them. A lot more. At least a dozen men were milling around, their laughter loud and coarse. Confederate and Gadsden flags hung from the porch of the main house. It was a hornet's nest. I crept closer, barely crawling the last 50 yards to the edge of the tree line, my binoculars pressed to my eyes. I started cataloging faces, committing them to memory. There was Jedediah Stone, a big bearded man who seemed to be the center of attention. I saw the others from the truck, and then I saw him. A man stepped out of the main house, a beer in his hand, and walked over to the fire. He clapped Jedediah on the shoulder, sharing a laugh. The firelight flickered across his face, illuminating his drooping mustache and the familiar bored expression in his eyes. It was Deputy Miller, the same deputy who had told me I must have provoked them. He wasn't just ignoring my complaints, he was one of them. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a gang of local thugs. This was organized, and the law in this town was on their side. And as I lay there, hidden in the dark, I watched Miller raise his beer in a toast, and all of them, in unison, raised their arms in a chilling, unmistakable salute. The retreat from the compound was a masterclass in controlled movement, but inside my head, a storm was raging. The sight of that salute, the casual inclusion of a sheriff's deputy in a nest of domestic terrorists, changed the entire strategic landscape. This wasn't about harassment anymore. This was about eradication. They wanted to wipe me and Maya off this land, to purify it. They saw us as an infection, and the established system, the very people I was supposed to call for help, were part of the disease. A cold clarity settled over me as I slipped back into my own house, silent as a wraith. I stood over Maya's bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest, her face soft and innocent in the moonlight. They had threatened this. For that there was no forgiveness. The war was no longer at my door. I was going to take it to theirs. For the next 48 hours I worked with a furious, methodical energy. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. During the day I maintained the routine for Maya. We baked bread, checked on the cows, and read stories on the porch swing. But every smile was a mask, every gentle word a carefully constructed piece of misdirection. The real work began the moment she was asleep. My farm was no longer a homestead. It was a prepared defensive position. I used the old tractor to move heavy feed troughs and piles of lumber to create subtle barricades along the driveway, things that looked like messy farm clutter but would force any vehicle into a narrow, exposed channel. I dug shallow trenches in the cornfield, just deep enough to lie prone in, offering concealment and a clear field of fire towards the house and the road. The root cellar, with its thick stone walls and single, easily defensible entrance, became Maya's safe room. I stocked it with water, blankets, a battery-powered lantern, and her favorite books. I told her we were decorating our special clubhouse for when we played hide-and-seek. She clapped her hands in delight, completely unaware of the grim purpose behind the game. My primary weapon was still intelligence. I needed to unnerve them, to sow paranoia in their ranks before the first shot was ever fired. They thought they were the hunters, anonymous and powerful. I had to show them they were the ones being watched. That night I went back into the woods, back to the edge of their compound. I didn't go for another long-range observation. This was a close-target reconnaissance. I moved like smoke, bypassing the 2 men they'd lazily posted as sentries, and crept right up to the back of the main house. Through a dirty window I saw Jedediah Stone at a table, cleaning a hunting rifle, a knife with a distinctive deer antler handle lying beside it. That was my target. I waited. Hours passed. Finally he got up and went to another room. It took me less than 30 seconds. A quick slice of the window screen, a silent lift of the sash, and my arm snaked inside. My fingers closed around the cold steel and bone handle of the knife. I was gone before he even returned, melting back into the darkness. I left no trace, no sound, Nothing to suggest a human presence, just an open window and a missing knife. A seed of unease. The next morning I drove into town for supplies, deliberately taking a route that would lead me past the sheriff's office. I saw Deputy Miller's cruiser parked outside. On my way back, I pulled over on a quiet stretch of road, took the deer antler knife, and used it to slash one of my own truck's tires. I changed it on the shoulder, making sure my hands were good and greasy. Then I drove home and called the sheriff's department to report an act of vandalism. It was a calculated risk, but I needed to look Miller in the eye. He was the one who responded, of course. He sauntered up my driveway, his face a mask of bored officialdom. "Having some trouble, ma'am?" he asked, his tone dripping with false concern. "Someone slashed my tire," I said, my voice steady, watching his eyes. "Just down the road. Thought you should know." He looked at the tire, then back at me, a flicker of something amusement, suspicion in his gaze. "Lot of that going around," he said noncommittally. "We'll, look into it." As he turned to leave, I held up my hand. "Deputy," I said, stopping him. "I almost forgot." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the deer antler knife, holding it out flat on my palm. "I found this lying in my driveway this morning. I figured it must have fallen off one of the trucks that keeps passing by. With a handle like that, I thought someone might be missing it." The change in his expression was instantaneous and profound. The lazy contempt vanished, replaced by a wide-eyed, slack-jawed shock. His face went pale, his gaze darting from the knife in my hand to my eyes, then back again. He recognized it. He knew exactly whose knife it was, and he knew it was not supposed to be anywhere near my farm. For a split second, the predator's mask slipped, and I saw the man underneath a weak, frightened bully confronted with something he could not comprehend. He knew in that moment that I had been there, that his fortress wasn't safe. The message was sent. I saw his hand twitch, almost as if reaching for his sidearm. The air crackled with a sudden, violent tension. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just stared at the knife, the impossible proof that the prey he and his friends were tormenting had just walked through their camp completely undetected and taken a trophy from their leader. Miller snatched the knife from my palm, his fingers fumbling slightly, his eyes never leaving my face. He was searching for something fear, anger, a tell of any kind, but my expression was a placid mask of helpful neighborliness. I gave him nothing. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the buzz of a horsefly near the porch steps. He finally found his voice, a low, guttural rasp that was a world away from his earlier lazy drawl. "Where did you say you found this?" I didn't blink. "Right there," I said, pointing to a spot in the gravel, a few feet from where we were standing. "Guess someone was careless." He knew I was lying. I knew he knew. That was the point. It wasn't a conversation. It was a declaration. He shoved the knife into his pocket, gave me one last look, a mixture of raw hatred and a new, unfamiliar flicker of fear, and stalked back to his cruiser without another word. As he sped away, kicking up a plume of dust, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. The psychological operation had begun. The hunter was now wondering if he was the one being hunted. That night the quiet was different. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of my first weeks here, nor was it the tense, waiting quiet of the past few days. It was the quiet of a held breath, the electric stillness before a lightning strike. They knew I wasn't who they thought I was. They would be angry, and they would be sloppy. Anger makes men predictable. I put Maya to bed, reading her an extra story, and holding her a little tighter than usual. I sang her the lullaby my own mother used to sing to me, my voice soft and even, a stark contrast to the coiled spring of readiness inside me. Once she was asleep, I moved her into the special clubhouse, the root cellar. I told her we were having a sleepover adventure, and she snuggled into her sleeping bag with her teddy bear, thrilled by the novelty. I kissed her forehead, locked the heavy wooden door from the outside, and went to work. I didn't turn on a single light in the house. I moved through the familiar darkness, my eyes already adjusted. My gear was laid out on the kitchen table. It wasn't my old kit, most of that was long gone, but a collection I had curated for just such a contingency. A semi-automatic shotgun loaded with buckshot for close quarters, a lightweight AR-15 platform with a red dot sight, and a suppressor, for speed and silence, and my sidearm, a Sig Sauer P226, holstered on my hip. I strapped on a plate carrier, sliding the ceramic plates into place. It felt like putting on a second skin, a heavy, uncomfortable memory I had hoped to shed forever. I checked my comms, a simple baby monitor, with the receiver in my pocket and the transmitter down in the root cellar with Maya. Simple, but effective. She could hear my voice, and I could hear her breathing. Then I went to my final and most important preparation. I climbed the ladder to the attic, the Macmillan TAC 338 slung over my back. The attic had a small, round window that overlooked the entire length of the driveway and the county road beyond. It was the perfect sniper's hide. I had spent the afternoon clearing a firing lane, setting up a sandbag for stability, and calculating ranges to various landmarks. The mailbox, the big oak tree, the turn in the road. I screwed my suppressor onto the end of the long barrel, the whisper-quiet click echoing in the stillness. I settled in behind the rifle, the cool metal a familiar comfort against my cheek. I adjusted the scope, the world outside leaping into crisp green-tinted focus through the night vision, and then I waited. It was just after 2 a.m. when the first set of headlights appeared, moving slowly down the county road. One truck, then another, and another. 4 in total. They didn't have their music blaring this time. They cut their engines and lights about a quarter-mile out, trying for a stealthy approach. Amateurs. I watched through the scope as figures began to dismount, shadowy shapes armed with baseball bats, tire irons, and a few hunting rifles. I counted 12 of them. Jedediah Stone was in the lead, Deputy Miller right beside him. They were moving in a loose, disorganized formation up my driveway, emboldened by their numbers, their whispers carrying on the still night air. They thought they were a posse, coming to put a scared woman in her place. They had no idea they had just walked onto a pre-sighted, fully prepared battlefield. They passed the big oak tree, the 300-yard mark. They kept coming, funneling right into the channel I'd created, their boots crunching on the gravel. I could see Jedediah's face clearly in my scope, his features twisted with hate. My finger rested lightly on the trigger. My breathing was slow, my heartbeat a steady, rhythmic drum. I had them. All of them. The shot was perfect, but I didn't take it. A single sniper shot would send them scattering for cover. That wasn't the plan. The plan was to let them get closer, much closer, to let them feel the security of my front porch, to believe they had won. I watched them cross the 100-yard mark, then 50. I could hear their boots on the wooden porch steps. A heavy fist hammered on my front door. "We know you're in there, bitch," Jedediah's voice boomed. "Come on out, or we're coming in." A crash followed as someone smashed a front window. Laughter. Then the sound of the front door splintering as a heavy boot kicked it in. They were inside my house, exactly where I wanted them to be. I swung the heavy rifle off the window ledge, set it down silently, and picked up my shotgun. It was time to go downstairs and introduce myself. The splintering crash of the front door was my cue. I moved from the attic with the fluid silence of a predator, the shotgun held at a low ready. They were loud, clumsy, full of adrenaline and cheap whiskey. I could hear them spreading out on the ground floor, their boots stomping on the hardwood, their voices a low, menacing rumble. "Check the upstairs," Miller's voice commanded, a pathetic attempt at authority. That was my target priority. Cut off the head of the snake. I positioned myself at the top of the stairs, deep in the shadows of the hallway where the moonlight from the windows couldn't reach. I heard heavy footsteps on the first step. One man, silhouette framed against the dim light from the shattered door. He was holding a tire iron like a club. He never saw me. The first blast from the shotgun was deafening in the enclosed space, a concussive roar that felt like it shook the entire farmhouse. The buckshot threw him backward down the stairs in a broken heap. Before the shock of the first shot had registered with the men below, I was already moving. I didn't stay in one place. I became a phantom. I dropped to the floor and fired a second round through the flimsy drywall of the hallway, a calculated shot aimed at the last known position of Miller's voice. A yelp of pain and a curse told me I'd hit my mark, if not fatally. Chaos erupted below. Shouts of confusion and fear replaced their earlier bravado. They were firing wildly now, bullets tearing through furniture and walls, their muzzle flashes illuminating their panicked faces for me. I used their panic against them. I tossed an old heavy lamp down the stairs, creating a diversion. As they fired at the noise, I slipped down the back staircase that led into the kitchen. I emerged from the pantry like an avenging spirit. 2 of them were fumbling to reload their rifles, their backs to me. I dispatched them with 2 precise shots from my suppressed AR-15, the soft pft, barely audible over their own panicked shouting. I moved through the living room, using the overturned furniture as cover, a ghost in their midst. Another went down as he rounded the corner from the dining room, his baseball bat clattering uselessly to the floor. They were starting to realize this wasn't a scared woman. This was an ambush. This was a slaughter. "Fall back! Get to the trucks!" It was Jedediah Stone, his voice cracking with terror. The remaining men, maybe 5 or 6 of them, scrambled for the broken front door. This was the part of the plan I had meticulously prepared for. As they spilled out onto the porch and into the yard, blinded by the darkness after being inside, I was already back upstairs, back at my attic window, back behind the Macmillan. The night vision scope turned the dark yard into a pale green shooting gallery. They were exposed, disorganized, running for their lives. They were no longer a mob. They were just individual targets. My breathing slowed, my world narrowing to the circle of the scope, the crosshairs, and the rhythm of my own heartbeat. Breathe in, find the target. Breathe out, squeeze. The TAC 338, even suppressed, issued a deep, heavy cough. The first runner, halfway to the oak tree, dropped like a stone. Breathe, cycle the bolt, find the target, squeeze. Another one fell near the driveway. Panic turned to sheer animal terror. They scattered, but there was nowhere to hide. I had chosen this ground. I knew every shadow, every dip in the terrain. Breathe, bolt, target, squeeze. Deputy Miller was limping heavily, trying to use one of the trucks for cover. My shot went through the truck door as if it were paper and found him on the other side. He crumpled to the ground. The last one standing was Jedediah Stone. He made it to his Ford, managing to start the engine, its roar a desperate scream in the sudden silence. He slammed it into gear, but he didn't get far. He drove right into the narrow channel I had created. His front tires hit the heavy, repurposed feed trough, and the truck, moving too fast, flipped onto its side with a sickening crunch of metal. Silence. The only sounds were the ticking of the cooling engine and the chirping of crickets, oblivious to the carnage. I stayed in my perch for a full 20 minutes, scanning the kill zone, ensuring there were no more threats. Then, and only then, did I unload, clear my weapons, and go downstairs. I stepped out onto my porch, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood, and surveyed my work. It was a grim, necessary harvest. I walked over to the overturned truck. Jedediah Stone was alive, pinned inside, groaning. I pulled open the door. He stared up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief and agony. Who are you?" he wheezed. I just looked down at him, my face unreadable. "I'm the woman who bought the old Miller farm," I said softly. "The one you came to scare." I didn't call the county sheriff. I made a single call to a number I hadn't used in years, a direct line to a man I had served with, a man who now held a very high position in the federal government. I didn't give him the details, just my location and a 2-word message: domestic threat. Within 2 hours, a fleet of black, unmarked SUVs swarmed my property. Men in tactical gear, the real professionals, took over. They handled everything with quiet, brutal efficiency. They processed the scene, bagged the bodies, and hauled away the trucks. Jedediah Stone was taken into federal custody. The official story, I was told, would be that a violent militia group had an internal dispute that ended in tragedy. A gas leak, a spark, an unfortunate accident. My name would not be mentioned. My farm would be left alone. Before he left, my old friend, now a man in an expensive suit, stood with me on my porch as the sun began to rise. "You could have just called me, Sarah," he said, his voice low. I looked out at the rolling hills, the peaceful cornfields. "They threatened my daughter," I replied. He just nodded, a deep understanding passing between us. "Stay safe," he said, and then he was gone. When Maya woke up, I was in the kitchen making pancakes, just like any other morning. The broken door was gone, replaced by a new, sturdier one. The shattered window was boarded up, a job I'd say the handyman was coming to fix later. The tire tracks and bloodstains in the yard had been raked over, covered with fresh soil. To my little girl, everything was as it should be. "Mommy," she said, sleepily climbing onto a stool, "did you have fun on your sleepover adventure?" I turned from the stove, a real, genuine smile finally reaching my eyes. I knelt down and wrapped her in a hug, inhaling the scent of her hair. "I did, sweetie," I whispered into her ear. "Mommy won." And as I held her, I knew the quiet on the farm was finally real. It wasn't the quiet of waiting or the quiet of fear. It was the quiet of peace, a peace I had bought and paid for, all over again.